We want to build a highly customizable calendar events app with the Flutter Calendar widget of Syncfusion. We will also schedule event appointments, edit them, and also remove them again. And lastly, we will also view our calendar differently as a monthly view, weekly view, daily view, and many more. If you're new here, subscribe to my channel and make sure to watch this video till the end. Let's get started by building our calendar. Therefore, we go to our build method, and here inside of our scaffold, we want to create a calendar widget. And now we create a new calendar widget, and here within the build method, we create then an SF calendar. If you then hot restart, you have here the standard calendar with a daily view. However, you also have multiple options, so you can change the calendar view, for example, to months. And with this, you have here this monthly calendar. And of course, you can also choose other views, for example, the monthly view, the daily view, the weekly view, timelines, and so on. To select this other view, simply choose then the right name. And after your hot restart, you will see that our calendar directly changed here to the schedule week, where later our appointments are then displayed here inside. Let's go back to the monthly view, and here we also want to initially set then our selected date to the current day. And therefore you can set here the initial selected date. And now if you hot restart, you see we have here one day selected, and you also can change here then every time the day. And this calendar is also highly customizable, so you have a lot of different properties. And here you can, for example, hide the cell border, and I put it here to a transparent color, and then we don't have here the lines in between anymore. So if you like it, then you can customize here your style. And of course, you can also apply a dark theme to this calendar. Simply go to your main file, and here inside I set then the theme mode to theme mode dark, and also set here the dark theme. And now we have here a dark calendar instead. And here inside you can then also define, for example, the background color, and I put it here to a black color, and with this it is darker. And secondly, we also can define here the accent color, which is then the color here of our elements. So here you see it turns then to white. And lastly, you could also set here, for example, the primary color, which will then change here our app bar. And like you see, we have created easily here a complex calendar. And now we also want to add here some appointments to our calendar. And most importantly, if you want to use here this calendar, this SF calendar, then you also need to go to your pub/spec YAML file, and here you need to include this Syncfusion Flutter calendar under your dependencies. And if you're already here, then you can also include the Intel package with which we later will handle our dates. And we also have here the provider for our state management. Next, we want to schedule some appointments and add them to our calendar. Therefore, if we click here on this floating action button, then we want to go to a new page. And here within this page, you can then set a title. You also can set here the from and to dates. And lastly, you can also add here more details for this event. Therefore, let's get started by building here this floating action button, and therefore I go here to the main file, and here inside of our scaffold we add then a floating action button, and if we then later click on this floating action button, we want to navigate to a new page, and this is then here this event editing page which we want to create together. Therefore, let's create this new page, and here inside we add then a field event, which is our event object, and this object then holds all of our data, the title, the dates, and also here the description at the bottom. And it also can be nullable, so we don't need to supply this event only if we later want to edit our event, so that we fill here then all the data of the event already inside. And therefore I have created here already this model object already, and here we have then all the data inside which you see here on the screen. So we have the title, we have some description, we have here this from date, this to date, and lastly also a boolean flag all day event, and this is exactly what we have here inside. And lastly, our event can also have a background color, which I have set here to the screen color. And this is then the background color of our event, which we later want to display here within our timeline. So all in all, the event is the fundamental model object within our app. Let's go back to our event editing page, and here we want to also create a constructor with our event. And now we want to build here our whole page, so we want to create this title and also these different dates which we can select. Therefore, let's go to our state, and here we want to create first of all a from date and also a to date. And these are then later displayed here at the top so that we can select a date for our calendar. And by default, we want to initialize these states with some value. Therefore, I also include here the init state, and then we basically set here the from date to the current time. And we also set the to date also to the current time, only that we add then 2 hours in time. And now we want to go to the build method, and here we want to create first of all an app bar. And within our app bar, we want to have a close button and also a save button with which we later can save our event to our calendar. Therefore, let's add here within our app bar a leading property where we set then this close button. And now we have here this close button instead. And secondly, we want to add here some editing actions, and therefore I create here a new method. And inside of it, we want to create then an elevated button with an icon. And here you can then set first of all an icon, which is here this done icon with the text save. And you also need to set here an onPressed handler, so later if we click on this button, then we want to execute some functionality. The style of our button doesn't fit here so well inside of our app bar, therefore we also want to add here a style. And here we set basically the primary color and also the shadow color to a transparent color. And with this we have here basically a normal button without a background color. Let's continue with our page design. So we also want to create our title and our dates. And therefore I go here to our scaffold, and here inside we create a column, and we also want to make this column scrollable so that we can display multiple widgets under each other which scroll. And we also want to wrap here around our column a form widget, and then we want to supply here a form key, and this key is then later used to validate here our form so that we make sure that you always need to put at least a title inside of this text field. And now let's go back to our build method, and here within our column we want to display our first widget, our title widget. And therefore I create here a new method build title where we create then a text field. And with this we have here this normal text field, and we also want to include here then some decoration. So I want to add here this hint text, and now it says here add title every time if there is nothing inside. And secondly, we want to add here then also the property controller. And here in our state, we want to create then this controller. So we create a new text editing controller. And within our dispose method, we also want to free our resources again from this controller up. So with this text editing controller, we can control later our text field. And we also want to add here already some validation for our text field. So we want to make sure that this text field always needs to have a value inside. And therefore I check here that the title is not empty. And if it is empty, then we want to display later an error message which says title cannot be empty. And otherwise we return here null for the successful case. And secondly, next to the title, also our appointment always needs to have a date so that we later can then put these inside of our calendar and also of our timeline. Therefore, we go back to the build method, and here under our title, we want to display then also our dates. And therefore I create here a new method, and here inside we create a column, and then we basically build here the from date, and therefore I create here a new method. And now we want to create here this datetime object, which consists of the date and also the time. Therefore we create here within our row a drop-down field, and here inside of this field we want to put then our from date inside. And we want to convert this datetime object then exactly to the string here, and therefore we create a new method, and I basically call it here utils and toDate. And this is another method I have already created, and here we make use of the date format, and then we basically format our datetime object to a string object. And with this date format we create then exactly here the string which you see here on the right side, which includes our year, our month, and so on. And to make use of this date format, also make sure that you have the intil package included, and also within your pubspec YAML file that you have included here this intil package. Let's go back here and build our from date, and here we want to also include an onClicked handler to our dropdown field, which we want to create right now. So basically we want to create right now here this dropdown field with this dropdown button, and if we later click then on one of these, then we want to show here this date picker to choose a date. Therefore let's now create this dropdown field, and here inside we want to return then a list tile where we put then our text itself inside. And with this you see here already our text which we have formatted before with this method. And secondly, we also want to include here this trailing icon, which is here this drop-down icon. And now we also have here this drop-down icon at the end. And later, if we click on this drop-down field, then we also want to add some functionality. Therefore, I include also this on-tab handler. And next to our date, we also want to display here another drop-down field with our time. And therefore, we go here up to our from method, which already displays here our first drop-down field. And next to it, we want to display a second drop-down field. And this time we want to format our from date to a time. And therefore, I simply add here another method to time. And this is another method I have created. And here inside, we basically take then another date format and we put then our date time object inside so that we get this time the hours and minutes instead. And now if you hot reload, you see we have here the time and next to it we have the date. And if you like, you can also put here the flex value for the first one to 2. And with this, we have then more space here for our first value. So it takes here 66% of the space and the other one takes then 33% of the space. And to improve the design a bit, we also want to include here every time a header, and therefore I simply wrap here our whole row widget inside of another widget build header. And here we put then the header itself inside. And now we want to create this new method build header, and here inside we create then a column to display multiple widgets under each other, and we simply display here then the text widget first of all. And secondly, under our text widget we want to display then our child widget, and this is then basically here this whole widget with our 2 drop-down fields. And now if I hot reload with this child widget inside, then you see we have here the header on top of our drop-down buttons. And with this, we can later select for our event the from date, and we also have normally a to date, which we also want to include. Therefore, I go here to this method build date time pickers, which displays here right now the from date, and under it we want to create another method to also display the to date. And here we basically duplicate our method which we have created before, and we only exchange here our header to 2. And also here we make sure that we put here this time the to date inside instead here of this from date which we have put inside before. And with this we also have here our second field inside. Next we want to add the functionality, so if we click on one field then we can select here the date. And secondly we will also later click on these fields here and then we can basically select the time. Therefore, we go here to these onClicked handlers of our from date. So if we click on these, then we want to add our functionality. And we want to create here, therefore, another method, which is called pick from date. And here inside, we put then a Boolean flag inside if we pick a date or if we pick a time. And if we click here on the first one, then we want to pick a date. And if we click on the second one, then we want to pick a time. And therefore, I set here this Boolean flag to false. And now we want to create this method, and here inside we want to call another method pick datetime, and here inside we want to put then our current datetime object inside, which you see here inside. And secondly, we want to put here our Boolean flag inside if we currently pick a date or if we pick a time. And now we want to create this specialized method to pick a date or to pick a time. Inside of the method, we get then our initial date, which is here initially the from date. And this is really important so that we basically initially set then later here the correct date initially inside, which we have selected before. So in this case, it is the 10th of the month, and therefore it should also select here the 10th of our month initially. And we want to get started by picking a date, and therefore we want to call here this show date picker method, which comes from the Flutter SDK. And here inside you can then put an initial date inside, which should be selected by default. And secondly, you also can select a first date and a last date. And these are later the limitations of our date picker, so that we make sure that we cannot pick other dates which outrange these values. Alright, this method then basically displays here our date picker so that we can pick here a date. And after we have then chosen our date and have clicked here on OK, then we basically get here this date which we have chosen back. And we want to make sure that this date is not null. And in case our date is not null, then we want to return this date. And we also want to add here the time, which is here displayed on the right side, so that we make sure that the time stays the same. And therefore I create here a new time duration, and this takes then out of our initial date the hour and the minute, so that we make sure that we have here the right part, the time object restored, and only this here can change. And this time is then added to our datetime object. And now we can already try it out. So I can click here on this date and you see we show here this date picker. And then we can basically select a date, which we then later get here returned back. Alright, let's also implement the time so that we can also select here a time. And therefore we simply go here again to our pick datetime method. And here, in case we are not picking a date, then we want to pick a time. And therefore we call here this time the method showTimePicker from the Flutter SDK. And this then displays here exactly this time picker. And here we also have an initial time which we can set. And we simply take here the initial time out of our initial date. And this makes sure that if I click here now on this button, then he selects here this time, which we have here right now inside, exactly also here in our time picker. Alright, after we have then picked our time, we also want to make sure that it is not null. And if it is not null, then we want to get first of all our initial date, and we want to combine our initial date with our time object. And therefore we create here also a time object, and the time object is then the time of what we have picked before. And with this, we make sure that we combine here our date object, which is here on the left side, with our time object, which is here on the right side. And this is always needed because we put our date object and our time object together inside of one datetime object. And this combines then the date and the time. Alright, let's also try this out. So I click here on this time. And you see initially it also selects the time which we had here inside before, and this is already working fine. And we also can then select here a time, and later you can then press here on OK. Alright, and now we have already implemented here the functionality of this pick from datetime and also of this one. And here inside we only need to get then our date object which we have picked. And here we want to make sure that this date object is not null. And if it is not null, then we can add this new date object which we have picked inside of our from date. And this will then store the date which we have picked inside of our state inside of this from date. And now we can basically try it out. So I select here another date and I click on OK. And then you see that he has also changed the state, and the same is for the time. I select here another time and then I click on OK, and you see we have here the new time also inside. The only problem we have right now is that you can select here a from date, which is then later as our to date. So here we have the 20th of the month, and here the to date is the 10th, which is here before. And therefore we also need to change here the to date if we have selected a date after our to date. And therefore we simply go here inside of this method and we check that if our date is after our to date, which is here the second date. If this is the case, then we want to modify our to date. And here we basically modify our to date so that we have here the same date object as our from date inside. And secondly, we will put here then the to date hours and minutes inside, which were here inside before. So let's try also this one out. So I select here another date and I click on OK. And now you see that also the to date has changed and also has selected here the same as our from date. However, if I select here another date, which is here before our to date, like this one, then you see that our to date is not changing. Alright, now we have learned how we can select here our from date, and we basically can do the same thing for our to date. And here we basically create then a new method, pick to date time. And this works basically the same as our method which we have created before. So first of all, for the first field, we put here a true flag inside because we want to select the date. And for our second field, we want to put then a false flag inside so that we can select then later our time. And now we want to create this method, and therefore we want to duplicate here our method which we have created before. And here we basically want to call it then to date instead. And we also put here then the to date initially inside. And instead of putting it here to the from date, we put it then to the to date. So basically it's exactly the same as what we have done before, only that we put here this time every time the to date instead inside. And now we can also click here and basically can also select here some date. And here we also have a small problem. So if I click here on the date and then I select here, for example, this date, then you see we can go before our from date, and this should not be accepted. And to prevent this, we also can put here inside of our pick datetime method this first date. And with this, we can decide what should be the first date which we can select within our date picker. And we basically want to go here to our pick date time, and we want to set then this first date. In the case we are currently picking a date, then we want to set the first date to the from date. And with this, we make sure that we cannot select here a date before our from date. Alright, let's try it out. So I click here on to date, and now I want to try to select here another date before our from date, and this is not working. I can only select here the 10th, and this is because our from date is also at the 10th of May. Alright, and with this we have created here the fundamental UI which we need to create our event and also to add it to our calendar. And now if we click here on the save button, then we want to save our event and add it to our calendar. Therefore, I want to create here a new method inside of this file, which is called saveForm. And here inside we access then our form key, and we want to validate our form. And like you remember, we have created this form key before in our state, which is then a global key. And like you remember, this form key was then also going here inside within our build method here inside of this form widget. And with this form key, we can now make sure that our title, which has here this validator, is also correct and that our title is not empty. Therefore, let's go back to this method, and here we basically check if our form is valid, which means that our title is not empty. And in case our title is not empty, then we want to basically create here a new event object. And inside of this event object, we want to put then our text inside of our text field, and also the from date and to date, which we have selected before. And next to it, we also want to add here a description and a Boolean flag. And these are also part of the UI, so we have here a checkbox, and we also have here later these details to add some more information about our event. And now that we have created our event, we also want to add it to our calendar, and therefore I want to use here the provider state management, and with the provider state management we can then get our event provider, and this is a new provider which we want to create. And within this provider, we can then store our state. And in our case, we want to have then a list of events. And these are all the events which are then later part of our calendar. And here inside, we want to create then also a getter method and also a method to add a new event. And this is pretty simple. So we simply add to our events list then this event and call this notify listeners. And with this notify listeners, we can then later update our UI. In case you use this event provider, you also need to go to your main file, and here you need to register your event provider, and therefore you need to wrap your material app inside of this change notifier provider, and then we create here basically this event provider. And with this we make sure that the event provider is accessible in our whole widget tree. If you want to learn more about how the provider state management works, then I will also link some videos inside of the description. Alright, let's go back to our saveForm method where we basically called this provider, and now based on this provider we can then call this method addEvent to add our event to our list here. Therefore we basically call on our provider this method addEvent, and here we put then our event inside. And after we have added this event, we also want to pop our page again so that we go to the previous page if we click here on the save button. And lastly, we only need to call the saveForm method every time if we click here on the save button. Therefore, I go here to this method build editing actions, which is here the save button. And if we click on the save button, then we want to call our method saveForm. And the same thing you can also apply to this add title field. So if you submit this field, you can also go here inside on this on field submitted callback. And here you can basically also call the saveForm if you like. And now you can try it out, so you can click here on the save button and you will see that the title cannot be empty. So our validation works. And then we also can type in here a real title and click on save, and this will then add our event. And now we want to display this event which we have added also inside of our calendar. To achieve this is pretty simple. We go to our calendar widget, which is displaying here this widget on the right side. And here in our build method, we want to access then our events, which we have stored within our event provider. And these events we need to put then inside of our SF calendar, and therefore you have here this property data source, and you need to create then a new class event data source, and here inside we want to put then our events inside. And this class is basically a wrapper around our events so that the SF calendar understands how our events are working. And therefore we want to create here a new class. And this class needs to extend then the calendar data source, which comes from this plugin. And then you need to define here the constructor so that we can put here our events inside. And then you have here this property appointments, and this is part of this calendar data source class. And we want to put our appointments then to this field. And like you can see here, we have a list of dynamic, which is stored inside of our calendar data source class. And basically we can put here then any event inside. However, if we later then get our event back, then we also want to convert this dynamic object again to our event object. And therefore we create a new method getEvent. And then we can every time access here the index of our list. And then we basically convert it back to an event object so that we can again access the event object instead of a dynamic object. And secondly, you need to override some methods from this calendar data source class so that it understands our event data structure. And within these overridden methods, we get here every time the event, and then we access here from our event the fields. So we access here all the fields which we have here stored within our own data object. And with this, we basically map our data and model objects to the data and model objects of this calendar data source. And this is the source this calendar can understand. And now after your hot restart, you will see here all of your events with these little dots here inside. And we can also add here some more events. So let's basically add here an event, and you see then we have here another event for this day. And we also can add here another event, and let's maybe change the date, for example, to this one. And then we click again here on save. And now you see we also have here another event added to our other date. And now if we click on one date, then we want to also see all the events of this date so that we can scroll here through, and then we see here in detail all the events of the day. To achieve this is pretty simple. First of all, we need to every time save the date on which we have clicked right now. And we want to save it here inside of our event provider. And here we create then another field, selected date. And this holds then every time the date on which we have lastly clicked. And we also create then here next to our field a getter and a setter method. And lastly, we also want to create another method, events of selected date. And here we will later calculate all the events of a specific date. And this basically means if we click on this date, then it also should show only the events of this date and not all the events from all the other dates. And this is what we will calculate here later. And now we can use the setDate method inside of our calendar widget every time if we change here our date. And therefore we go here to the calendar widget, and here we have this on long press. And every time if we long press on an item, then we want to actually save this date. So I call here this event provider, and then we want to put here our date inside, which we get from these details. And this is then every time the selected date on which we have currently clicked. And next to saving the date, we also want to go then to a new view to this timeline and also display here the date inside. To achieve this, we want to call here this method show model bottom sheet, and here inside of this bottom sheet, we want to create a new widget. Therefore, let's create this task widget. And here within the build method, we want to get then first of all our event provider. And here we can then get all the selected events. And here we basically call then this events of selected date. And this selected events holds then all the events of our selected day. So here in this case, 2 events. If I click on this one, then we have no events. And therefore we also want to check here if the selected events are empty. Then we want to show here simply this text, no events found. Otherwise, if we click on a date which has here some events, then we also want to display it in a timeline. And therefore we simply return here this SF calendar like what we did before. And here we take then this time a different view. So we take here a timeline instead. And secondly, we also want to add here a data source. And here within our event data source, which we have created before, we want to put then all of our events inside. And now we can try it out. So I have here a calendar with 1 event. And if I click then long press on this item, you see that we also display here the events inside of this timeline. We want to improve this timeline a bit so that the UI looks a bit better than this one here. But before we do this, we also want to include the initial displayed date, and this is basically here every time the column which you select, and we want to set it then to the selected date. And next we also can create an appointment builder, and this will create then the UI for this appointment which you see here in the green color. And here we can then create a new appointment builder, and here inside we basically get then the event data first of all, which needs to be displayed. And secondly, we want to create then a container, and within this container we get then here the width and height of our container by accessing here the details. And this is then the details of this calendar because the calendar itself knows how big this element should be displayed. And now we can basically build here this appointment with some widgets, and I want to create here simply a text widget, and then we access here from our event the title, which should be displayed here inside. And now if I hot reload, you see that the green color disappeared and we only show here the title. And we can also customize it more. So for example, we put it here to center so that it is then centered here within our space. And we also can give it here some decorations so that we can set here a background color. And we also want to make it then a bit more rounded. And with this, we also have here this background color inside. Let's go again here up to our SF calendar. And here we can also include this on tab handler. So later, if we then click on this, then we can add here our functionality. And you also can go here to the theme data, which is wrapped around our SF calendar. And with this, you can modify here the look and feel of our calendar. And we want to get started by changing the text style of our time. And with this, our time here at the top is displayed in bigger font size. Next, you can go back to your SF calendar, and here you can then set the header height to 0. And this will then shrink here the height of our months. And now you see the month is not displayed there anymore. However, you can also set here the today highlight color to black, and then you see that the today is always displayed here at the top. If you like, you can also change here the selection. So here you have a decoration, selection decoration, and then you can basically set here a different color inside. And I set it right now to red. And now every time if you select here anything, then it has the red color. On the other hand, if you don't want to display this selection, then simply put here a transparent color inside instead. And with this, the selection will not be displayed. And most importantly, if we then click here on one of our events, then we also want to show this event again up. And therefore we go here inside of this on tab handler of our SF calendar widget. And here inside we basically check first of all if the appointments are not null. And if this is the case, then we can get here the first appointment. And this is then the event which you see here inside on which we have clicked. And now we want to open this event on which we have clicked inside of a new page. And therefore I call here this navigator.push so that we push to a new page. And here I have created another page, which is this event viewing page. And inside of it, we put our event inside. And with this, if I click on this event, you see we are going here to a new page. And this page is basically then displaying all the information of our event. So I don't want to go into detail about it because this is pretty simple, like some text widgets. And here in this page, you can also display then at the top this edit button and also this delete button. And with the edit button, we basically implement here the functionality that we navigate here to a new page, which is here this event editing page. And this time we put then our event here inside. And this is basically the page which we have already created before. And this time we put here an event inside, which we now want to display if we click here on this edit button. Because now if I click here inside, then you see that we get first of all an error. And this error happens because the from date is not initialized. And here because I have put inside before if the widget event is null, then we initialize our from date and to date. However, if it is not null, which is right now the case because the event is existing, then we need to also add here a second case. And therefore, if our event is not null, then we want to get here first of all from our widget the event. And then based on this event, we want to access here the title, the from date and to date, and want to put it then inside of our state here. And now we can try it again out. So I click here on this edit button and you see this time we are going here inside, and then we are basically here inside of this edit mode and can also change this data. To also modify this data, if we click here on the Save button, we need to go to our Save Form method. And here, instead of creating every time a new event and adding a new event, we want to modify our current event. Therefore, we first of all go here inside and create a new Boolean field where we check if our event, which we got from the outside world, is existing or not. And if our event is existing, then we are within the editing state. And if we are here inside of the editing state, then we don't want to add our event. Instead, we want to edit our event, and therefore we want to create here a new method where we put then our new event inside and also the old event. And lastly, we also want to call navigator.pop so that we pop our current page. And now we only need to create this edit event method. Therefore, we go here to our provider. And here we want to add then this edit event method where we get then the new event and also the old event. And based on this old event, we want to find then our event index here inside of our events list, which we have stored here in our state. And with this, we get the index of the event that we have stored. And now we want to modify this index and simply want to put our new event instead of this old event here inside. Also make sure that you call here notify listeners so that the UI gets updated. And now we can try it out. So I have modified here some data and we click on save. And then this data should be modified. So let's go here back to our timeline. And then you see we have here this modified event inside. And I also can tap again on this event. And then you also see here this modified data. And by the way, if you want to get here this whole source code of this application, of this calendar, then you can get it with the first link in the description. And here I will also add then other fields inside of the source code. So this is a more complete example with also all day event and also description. So you can also modify here some more data. And otherwise, you also can check out with the second link my Flutter courses where I teach you how you can become a better and more efficient developer.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for watching this video. Please make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel here to get the latest news about Flutter, and see you soon. Bye!